All right, everyone, for the sake of time, I'd like to get started today. I know many people are jumping on in the middle of their day, so I want to make sure that we use our time efficiently and get going. So as more people are jumping on, that is no problem. But I would like to start by introducing myself. My name is Stephanie Worthley, and I am the K through 12 Guidance Department Chair for the district. So welcome if you are joining us today. I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Now we have a full presentation put together for you today to talk all about future planning for our class of 2024. We've met with our seniors twice now already, and we are excited to work with them as they begin to think about what it is they are looking for down the road. So just to start with some introductions, as I said, I'm Stephanie Worthley, so I work with students last names A through BO, excuse me. So Elise DeLuzio works with students last names BR through E. Ann Lodge, last names F through K. Amanda Patton, L through P. And Eric Warburg picks up the end of the alphabet, last names Q through Z. Also joining us today is Russ Becker. He is our school adjustment counselor. So as I said, we have a full agenda plan today. We are going to talk a little bit about what the roles and responsibilities are through this future planning process, who's responsible for what your child should be working on. We're going to talk a lot about college visits and deadlines, creating lists of schools. We'll talk about standardized testing and how do you score with your son and daughter, and kind of, again, what your child is working on right now. And then some additional information that we want to share with you folks about like NCAA, financial aid, and so forth. So again, we have a full agenda. This recording, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to jump off, I am going to share the recording with all senior parents and guardians later today as soon as I'm able to download it. So I want to start by just saying that we recognize at this point in time, the majority of our conversation with students is based around college. Typically every year we are sending about 93% of our students off to 2 or 4 year colleges. So a lot of the work that we are doing with students is around college planning. However, with that said, we are always encouraging students to come down and talk to us, especially if they are thinking that college is not the right fit for them right now. We have many other alternative plans that we are happy to help your child talk about, whether it's a gap year or a trade school, different travel or volunteer programs. We have a lot of information posted on our school counseling website, which, if you're logging in today and thinking, I'm not sure my child is ready yet, they've expressed some different interests, I encourage you to check out some of the information we have on our site, and really encouraging students to come down and talk with us now. Throughout this point of your child's high school career, we've seen students multiple times and we've seen students less. It's really has varied depending on what the student needs are, which again is totally fine. But now that we're really working with our seniors on what their life might look like after high school, we will see our seniors a lot more in the next couple months. So, as we're working with our students and kind of making those plans for what life looks like after high school, let us know, reach out to us, set up appointments. We want to have these conversations. We want to make sure that all of our seniors, when they're finished with graduation and the first weekend in June, that they have a plan for what life looks like for them afterwards. So with that said, again, most of our talk is primarily around college planning. So we discussed this with our students. We met with them in the auditorium last week as a big group, kind of walk through what our timelines look like, what to expect, what they need to do, what we're going to work on. And then we met with them again just yesterday, kind of in smaller groups by guidance counselor. And we really want to make sure that everybody understands and is aware that this whole process is not done solely by the student. There's many different people involved. Everything is not going to all happen at the same time, and that's okay. We will work with students on their time frame too. So as students are working toward their application deadlines, some students already have come down to us and said they are ready to roll, and some students haven't even really created their list yet. And again, that is fine. We will meet the student where they are at. So we're encouraging students to really research schools, work on creating those lists. We did that a lot with students in junior year, working in SCORE, searching for colleges, looking at their academic profile, what their interests are. And we're hoping that students continue to do that. One of the big things is we've asked students to notify their teacher and their guidance counselor by October 1st if they have a November 1st deadline. So we're looking for students to let us know 1 month before their first deadline. So if they have a December 1st deadline, back that up a month would be November 1st. But we do recognize that a good portion of our senior class every year is applying either early action or early decision. So therefore, we need to get all of our school materials ready to go kind of in that 1 month window. So certainly the student's responsibility by that college deadline is to submit their application, make sure their essay is all ready to go, and certainly pay the application fee. So what you can expect from us with your students, we are meeting with students and families now. We're helping to provide some feedback on college lists. We write letters of recommendations for all of our students, and we will submit everything through our SCORE program. So our letters, the student's transcript, something called our school profile. So again, we need notification from the student by October 1st. And then we are asking all of our students to connect with their teachers now who have agreed to write letters of recommendation to make sure that they're aware of college deadlines as well. I'm actually going to pass the mic over to Amanda Patton. Oh, Amanda, are you there?
I am here, yes. We need to go to the next slide. Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Patton. It's nice to have you here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of application deadlines that your child may come across. The first deadline is called early decision. So this is the one that is binding, which means that if your child applies early decision and they are accepted to that college, they do need to attend that school. That means that students can only apply to one college early decision. It is a binding agreement. Typically, those early decision deadlines are in October, November, or December. And typically, you would hear back from that college in December, possibly in early January if it's a later early decision deadline. So again, this is a binding agreement. It's only a deadline that is a good fit for students that have a very clear first choice. I always tell students that it's helpful to make sure you've visited all the colleges on your list and you just very much feel strongly that this is where you would like to be. A downside of early decision can be the financial aid piece. Essentially, you're agreeing to attend that college if admitted without knowing what the financial aid package looks like or without having the opportunity of comparing your financial aid with other colleges. So it is definitely a family decision if the student wants to go that route. With the early decision piece, there's an early decision agreement that a parent, the school counselor, and the child will have to sign. And that's just to let the college know that everyone understands what early decision means and that the student will attend if admitted. Students can find this when they enter in their deadline in the Common App and in SCORE. There's a pop-up that will come up that will prompt them to sign off on it electronically. If your child has any questions about that, they should come see their guidance counselor. The next deadline is early action. So this is a really popular deadline for Medfield students. It's non-binding, which means that students can apply to more than one college early action. So non-binding, typically with an October, November, sometimes December deadline, and typically students hear back by mid-December with the decision. What's helpful with early action is that students will hear back from those colleges and still have time to apply to additional colleges for the regular decision deadline. The outcome of early action or early decision could be that they're admitted, or that they are denied, or that they are deferred. If the student is deferred, they'll automatically be reconsidered for a regular decision. If a student is denied, they can't reapply to that college within the same school year. They could apply to that college again the following year. The other good thing about early action is that although you hear in December, you don't have to make a decision about whether or not you want to attend until May 1st. The last deadline that's available or typical is the regular decision deadline. So also non-binding. Typically the deadlines are in January or February. Students hear back in March or April and need to make a decision by May 1st. There are some students that just aren't ready to apply early action. That's absolutely fine. Maybe they need to work on their essay a little more, do some more college tours, or maybe they're focusing on their senior year grades for Q1 and Q2. That's absolutely fine if they want to apply regular decision as well. The last deadline that may come up is rolling admissions. So these are non-binding deadlines. Applications are processed as they are received, so students can apply throughout the course of the school year. And typically students hear back fairly quickly within 2 to 8 weeks after applying. So even if they heard back in October, let's say, they still don't need to make a commitment to that school until May 1st. Stephanie, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so a little bit about creating a balanced list. So, students have been searching different colleges and visiting different colleges and starting to narrow down that list. It's really, really important to make sure that that list is balanced. So that means that students aren't applying to only schools that fall into that REACH category, let's say. A school would be considered a REACH if the student's GPA and SAT or ACT score falls below the average for that college. Now, we all know that GPA and SAT or ACT scores aren't everything. That doesn't define the student completely. There are recommendations, activities, their essay, lots of different things that go into a decision. But using test scores and GPA can give you a sense of how admissible you are to that particular college. It is absolutely fine, and we support students applying to REACH schools, but we want to make sure that the majority of colleges on your child's list is not in that REACH category. Ideally, most of the colleges on their list should be in that fit or match category. So that means the GPA and test scores are within the average for the college on their list. We want to make sure that students feel successful when they get to their college. So, finding these schools that are in that match range is a good indication that they can feel, confident that they'll have academic success at that school. And then certainly we do recommend that students have 1 or 2 likely colleges on their list. So that's when their test scores and GPA are above the average for that college. I always tell students to make sure that you truly love your likelies. Don't just throw a college on there because your scores are above the average for that college. It is possible that you may attend that college. So if you truly love every college on your list, including your likelies, you're going to be happy with the outcome. If your list is balanced, you're happy with all your schools, that's a really good way to set yourself up to have lots of options and feel good about your future plans. I also want to point out, sorry, Stephanie, you can go back once again. As you're trying to figure out where a college falls on your list, I want to remind you all that there's this amazing feature in SCORE called the scattergrams. So if you look up a particular college, almost every school should have this scattergram graph, which you can see an example of on the slide. So students can see it's Medfield specific data, so you can see the students who have applied, not their names, but you can see their data in terms of students from Medfield who applied to a particular college and what the admission outcome is. So whether that's accepted, not accepted, waitlisted, deferred, and you can see where you fall within that group of applicants. So this is an example. You can see there's a star for this particular student for the University of New Hampshire, and you can see that this college for this particular student is in kind of that match or likely range. All of the other Medfield applicants who applied and were admitted are kind of surrounding this one student. So this would be an indication that this college is probably a match or a likely for this particular student. These scattergrams aren't perfect. They aren't everything in deciding who will be admitted where, but it is helpful to figure out the likelihood of admission. And the last thing I want to bring up is college visits. So we have 81 different college admission counselors visiting MHS this fall. Students can come down to meet with these admission counselors during their flex period or after school. In SCORE, students can view all of the different visits, all of the different reps that are visiting throughout the fall. And I believe Mr. Parga sends out the news flash where you can view which colleges are coming each week. I definitely recommend to students that they come down and talk to admission counselors, especially if a counselor is coming to visit from a school that they are applying to. Getting FaceTime with admission counselors is really helpful. The student will learn more about the college. The admission rep will put a face to the application. So I definitely encourage students to come down to introduce themselves to schools on their list. This is also a really great way if your child is hoping to expand their list. They can come down and just kind of listen to the different schools present, and oftentimes they'll get a better sense than just looking on SCORE or on a school's website as to whether a school may be a good fit for them. I also want to remind everybody that seniors get 3 excused absences this year to go on college visits during the school year. There's a form they can pick up in guidance, and it's also available to them on their class website for counseling. They can fill out the excused absence form ahead of time and get that absence excused to go on a college visit. I'm going to turn it over to Ann Lodge to talk a little bit more about standardized testing.
Thanks, Amanda. And everyone, as we are going through this webinar today, if questions are coming up that we are not addressing, or if you need clarification on anything that we are sharing with you today, please don't hesitate to post any questions in the Q&A section, and we will either get back to you or address larger questions that might come up with several of you towards the end of the presentation together. I wanted to take the time to talk to you a little bit about standardized testing and how that is going to come into play for your sons and daughters as they are submitting applications. For your children, if they are still planning on taking an SAT or an ACT, we wanted to just remind you about upcoming dates and deadlines. There is an October 7th SAT that is offered here at Medfield High School. We are in the late registration period right now, but students can still register through the College Board website until September the 26th. There is also a November 4th sitting, not at Medfield, but local high schools will offer the November 4th SAT, and that has an October 5th deadline. And then if you have a child who's thinking about taking the ACT or would like to sit for the ACT for a second time, there is a September 22nd registration deadline for the October 28th ACT and November 3rd registration deadline for the December 9th ACT. We know that there are many students who have taken their tests and are planning to use what they completed last spring and submit those scores, and there are plenty of students who took the test that will not be submitting scores. It's a lot to think about as you're going through the process to try to determine what makes the most sense for your child and whether or not to submit scores, because so many schools remain test optional at this point. The National Center for Fair and Open Testing, or fairtest.org, houses a ton of wonderful, wonderful information about schools and their requirements that you can go to and browse with your child to determine whether or not a school does require testing or not. You should certainly also be looking to colleges' admission web pages to gather that information, but the Fair Test website will share larger sets of information for anyone seeking that. Slide, Stephanie, thank you. So you'll find that as you're navigating the process, you might be hearing from schools that either still require tests, that might call themselves test optional schools, or occasionally you might hear about schools that report that they are either test free or test blind. And those two terms really are interchangeable. There are over 2,000 colleges in the United States that have declared that they are test optional or test free for applicants for this coming fall. So that really is many, many school choices out there that are not requiring testing as part of the application process. So just as a reminder with some terminology, if a school is test optional, it simply means that students can make the determination as to whether or not they would like to submit their test scores. But if a school calls themselves test free or test blind, and there are about 86 schools across the United States, including the University of California system and California State University, and those colleges have committed to saying that they will not take test scores into consideration, even if you were to submit them. So they will not look at scores whether or not you choose to submit them. When your child is making the decision as to whether or not to submit their scores, there are some guidelines that they can consider. Generally, a good rule of thumb is to consider submitting the test scores if the scores are sort of well within that 50% range of admitted students. And that information you can generally find on a college's admission website that might be listed under profile of the most recent class or profile of the admitted student. And we can help search for some of that information if you have questions and you're not finding that information readily on a college's website. We might have additional information that we've received from colleges as well. There are some colleges that will still recommend submitting your scores as well. And in those cases, you certainly want to follow the college's guidelines. Generally, students want to think about withholding their scores from colleges if their scores fall below that 50th percentile of admitted students. And they feel pretty confident that other areas of their application are really going to highlight who they are as a student and what they can bring to that campus community aside from those SAT or ACT scores. But certainly, like in all areas of this process, if your child has questions about whether or not to submit to scores to any schools, they should definitely set up a time to have a conversation with their counselor. We might advise them to send their scores to some schools, but not to others. And we can certainly help them navigate that process. Okay, and I think at this point, I'll turn things over to Elise.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Elise DeLuzio. Just to sort of quickly take stock of where we are and the information we're sharing with all of you today. So we're really talking about the three primary elements of the application process are really that application itself, which most students are doing on Common App. And Lodge just spoke about the test score piece. And the third element, which I'm going to go into some detail on now, is the letters of recommendation and the transcript. And this third element, these are the pieces that we send on behalf of your child from Medfield High School. And I know that for you as parents thinking about supporting your child through the process, you are probably wondering, okay, what exactly does my child need to do? And how do I know if they've done it and done it correctly? So I'm going to talk a little bit through that. So within the letters of recommendation, one of those pieces is the counselor letter. And we do write letters for all of our students to send out to their colleges. The process for your child to request the letter from us is really very straightforward. It happens within SCORE. And you can see on the right here just sort of the steps that your child will take to put that request in for us, which we also reviewed for them. But essentially, the key here is really communicating with us as their counselor about where we need to send their counselor letter and transcript. And they can communicate that by keeping their SCORE account updated and keeping that list of applying or applied up to date. And secondly, when they're applying, which will also be listed in SCORE. So the communication is really key. And the best way for your child to communicate with us is to keep SCORE updated and to fill out a form we've sent their way, which is called the transcript request form, and just has them list their first college deadline, and so that we can make sure that we have everything in on time. And just mentioning, going back to what Stephanie Worthley said at the beginning of the presentation, we have this October 1st deadline for students to enter all of their requests. And we put that in place, recognizing that many students will be applying for November 1st, and we want to ensure everything gets out to colleges in time. But for some students, we also recognize they might apply later. So if you're, sitting here thinking, well, my child's not going to go for the November 1st deadline, they might be applying later, we would still ask them to keep communicating, still fill out that transcript request form for October 1st, even if they're just writing in the form, I don't know yet when my first deadline is, but it's likely going to be in December or January. That is completely fine too. So we do like to mention that every year there are just a few schools typically that come into play that may not be on Common App. They might use their own website or portal through their school. They may use a different application called the Coalition. And in this case, that really impacts the where the student is filling out the application, so meaning they're going somewhere other than Common App. But on our end, for the getting your child's transcripts and letters of recommendation out, we're still using SCORE. So that piece does not change. The using SCORE for the requests is the same regardless of where the actual application is for the college. So these are a couple of frequently asked questions that we get every year. So one big question is, if your child's applying for a November 1st deadline, we know that the Q1 report cards aren't out just then. So students will think to themselves, okay, is the college going to get my first quarter grades? I'm really crushing it. I want them to see how I'm doing. And the answer is yes. So we will automatically send those Q1 grades out to all of the college on your child's list as soon as they become available. So typically that would be around the second week of November. And then the same exact process happens at the mid-year point. The colleges, most do typically require mid-year grades. So we automatically send those out to all of the colleges on your students list. And the good news is this is one thing that you can take off your child's to-do list. They don't have to make any requests. We know that the colleges are looking for these pieces of information, and we will take care of that automatically. Another question we often get is, Amanda Patton talked about building that college list, and sometimes students have their full list and they know they're done. Those are all the schools they're applying to. But we recognize that other students might have maybe 4 schools they definitely want to apply to, and they may decide down the road, I want to add a few more, or I just, finally got out to visit a school down south or out west, and I've decided to apply to that school later on. That is completely normal and fine. And in that case, if your child adds a school, once they've put in those initial requests for us to send out those letters of recommendation and transcript, we just go back to the communication. So we would just ask for a week notice to make sure we get everything out in a timely fashion, but essentially we just need the student to add the new colleges into SCORE and to enter those requests, and we ask them to shoot us an email just so we can be positive that everyone's in the loop and we can have all of their materials sent out. And then for the teacher letter of recommendation, you can go to the next slide, please, Stephanie. It's a very similar process to the counselor letter. The one piece that we really like to highlight, and we talked about students starting last spring of junior year, is we really feel it's important to speak with teachers initially in person and have that face-to-face conversation to ask if they're willing and able to write a letter of recommendation. So now that we assume most students have taken this step, if they haven't, there's definitely still time, and they should plan to have a conversation in the next week or so, if possible. But the student will go back into SCORE and enter requests. And we did walk through students through the process of how you actually, where to click and SCORE. When we met yesterday, we showed them how to do that. And students, we've guided them all to ask one teacher for a letter of recommendation. If they come across colleges in their list that do require 2, which can sometimes happen, they will also enter that request into SCORE and send it out to the specific colleges where they would like that second letter to go. And lastly, as a way to kind of sum up all of these little details within these 3 primary steps that we're talking about, the application, the test scores, the request and SCORE, we have made this cheat sheet for all of our seniors. And we have sent it out to all of them. We gave them hard copies yesterday. We really recommend use of this sheet as sort of it's a one-page double-sided quick guide with, you can see a to-do list there for all of those little steps that we are asking to have done by October 1st. It's got some key information that students will need to enter into their actual applications, and some specific details. So this will be coming to your inboxes as well after this webinar. And again, I think is a great sort of quick reference and guide to look back on as you move forward with the process. And I'm now going to turn it over to Eric Warnberg.
Thanks, Elise. Mrs. Lodge, you had mentioned in there you wanted to answer that question live. Do we want to try to do that now since it relates to recommendation letters?
Sure, that probably makes a lot of sense. So there was a question asked by a family member here about the letters of recommendation and whether or not families or students get to choose which letters are sent to which schools, recognizing that schools all have different requirements for what they will actually accept. So, and like Elise had mentioned previously, the general teacher letter, so the primary teacher that a child has asked to write that letter of recommendation will go to every school that that child applies to. The counselor letter will also go to every school. If there are, if a student has asked an additional teacher to write a letter of recommendation because a school required, one of their schools requires 2 letters, at that point, there is a separate process for students to request letters that go to specific schools, to that school that requires more than one, and they can certainly choose to ask the teacher to send it to schools that also accept more than one teacher letter. And this is something that we reviewed with them yesterday when we met during their flex period and walked them through step by step how to complete that request process in SCORE. So they most likely worked through some of that yesterday, and if they didn't get to all of it, they do have the directions step by step as to how to follow that process to submit those letters of recommendation. Thanks, Mr. Warnberg.
Thank you, Mrs. Lodge. And just to speak on that, number one, it was great to see the seniors yesterday and to work with our caseloads. We love this flex period where we're able to have this FaceTime with the kids, and they've responded. A lot of kids have already reached out to many of us to set up flex periods and meetings to make sure that they're where they need to be in the process. So a couple of ways that students can have the outside recommenders, as Mrs. Lodge had mentioned, through the Common App. They can put in a name and an email of an outside person, a boss, or someone who's a non-Medfield email. And they can also give people an envelope and mail in a hard copy. Oftentimes that's the most direct path for someone if they're outside of the Medfield organization and they're not using SCORE or they're not familiar with Common App. Go to the next slide, please, Mrs. Worthley. So some other areas to consider in the application process for the athletes and the artists and students that are involved in music and theater or receive additional accommodations for learning differences. If you have a child that may be playing at the Division I or II level in college, they have to have their transcripts and board scores submitted to the NCAA. It's very similar to applying to a college. There are some minimal requirements that students need in order to participate. Mrs. McGrory, our secretary, oversees this, and she can help any student that sets up an NCAA account and how they can do their part for allowing us to send the transcript to the NCAA clearinghouse. For the artists out there that are applying specifically to art schools or art programs, Ms. Drew is the point person. For the last few years, she's talked about using an app called Slide Room, I think it's called. She helps students be able to put a lot of this stuff now is completely electronic, and she's a great point person. As for music and theater, many schools will want you to apply to a school first, get accepted, and then audition. And then a number of schools will do the exact opposite, where you have to audition before you apply. All of us have had some students that have gone through this process in years past. It is certainly nuanced, and it's certainly one where we want to have clear communication about what is needed and when. And if you have a student that's following a path or considering this path, please have them reach out specifically to their guidance counselor. And in terms of support services, any student that's receiving formal accommodations or modifications through 504s or IEPs. This information can be carried over to the college level. Many colleges pride themselves on their level of support services. Others, it's very well-meaning graduate students that act as tutors, but every school is going to have their own form of support for students with learning differences. We can help navigate that in terms of what needs to be sent and when it needs to be sent. Oftentimes it's after families have deposited in May. At that point, if they're doing an accepted students day or orientation, we strongly encourage families to visit the support services center and ask, how does this 504 translate to the college environment? How does the accommodations and supports on an IEP translate here, and what does it look like, and who's the point person for our child as they enter this unknown environment in September of their freshman year in college? So from the financial aid side of things, there are a lot of changes on the horizon that are happening to the class of 2024 in terms of the FAFSA and the CSS profile. The pre-application for federal student aid is certainly something that we encourage families to fill out, specifically if your income fluctuates on a year-to-year basis, or you potentially have multiple children that are in college. Oftentimes filling out the FAFSA is the minimal requirement for students to apply for work-study programs on a college campus. The CSS profile is another form of an application for financial aid that some colleges, but not all, will require. For the past few years, these have gone live, these forms, usually in October. We're hearing that there are some changes on the forefront that we're still trying to learn about as well. I think they've extended that opening period for December and January. Oftentimes you have to reference your tax forms from the last couple of years. It's always beneficial to families to communicate to the financial aid office of the schools that your children are considering, just to get some advice or any updates on how specific colleges operate through financial aid. Many schools will offer merit packages to families and students based on the application process, based on getting an acceptance letter. Again, applying sooner rather than later is certainly good advice, but to be aware of the financial aid deadlines at each and every individual school that your child is applying to. So in terms of scholarships, we try to identify them in 3 levels. There's local scholarships, state scholarships, and national scholarships. In terms of the Medfield specific local scholarships, we will meet with the seniors in January, give them a little bit of a pep talk about senioritis, congratulate them on hearing some good news, and encourage them to continue to work hard in the classroom. And then we'll have them fill out roughly a 2-page application that puts them in the pool for thousands and thousands of dollars of Medfield local scholarship money. It's good for them to have a parent or both parents in the room when they're filling it out. There are a few tax questions and income questions. In terms of the state and federal scholarships that are available, we try to update on our school counseling website the scholarships as they come in. We try to post those with the dates, deadlines, and applications if they're available. And I think one of the more underutilized resources in this entire financial aid landscape is MEFA, the Massachusetts Educational Finance Authority. Fantastic resource, great podcasts, very welcoming people when you call them on the phone. Our original plan is to have them to come out on October 5th for a financial aid night. That might be in conflict with another school event. So if this does change, I'm sure something will be posted in the news flash, but I would strongly encourage you to visit the site, listen to a podcast or two. And it's not just about finances. This latest one from August was about just making a plan for after high school. Just some really, really good advice that I think supports some of the things that we say in our office, and certainly will help support parents as they support their kids through this process. Okay, I think at this point, I'm going to be turning this over to Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Eric, and hello, everyone. My name is Russ Becker. As mentioned, I am the school adjustment counselor here, and I just wanted to take a very quick moment of your time to just kind of talk about mental health and what that looks like, as well as a couple things to note and a couple things to look out for as you're going on college tours, or just kind of weighing your options for next year. Prior to beginning, I totally recognize that for many of you, this topic does not feel relevant, but given the sharp increase in need and mental health concerns at the next level, we found that it was certainly an area that is likely under-discussed and something that we feel is very important to share with you all. Just simply based on feedback from many of the recent graduates that we've had, they sort of felt that maybe their mental health was in check, or they sort of understood the process for their own mental health, but where they sort of got tripped up was they didn't consider what would happen if their roommate or a friend was struggling. And so even if this does not feel relevant, like I said, we still think that it's a worthwhile conversation so that everybody can be informed and that everybody can continue to be safe and get the services that they may need. So I think when people go on college tours, many of the same things I think draw people, and many of the same things tend to get highlighted, whether it be the cafeteria, whether it be the dorms, whether it be the classrooms. Typically speaking, however, the mental health services that are on campus do not get highlighted to the same degree. The chances are your child does not really care. They might not be all that interested in it, but I think it is very important to point out where they are. And in addition to that, not just where they are, but how your child can access them at any point in time. Most of our kids here at high school, if they need anything, they kind of understand the process. They can send their counselor an email, they can send me an email, they can sign up through Flex, or they can come down to guidance with their hair on fire and they know that something or somebody will be able to see them right then and there. At college, that's not always the case. So many of these college counseling centers have their own sign-up service. Some of the tours or some of these orientations will go over just how to sign up. But like I said, I just think it's really important to reiterate that fact and to know once your child steps on campus, they know exactly where these things are and how to access them. In addition to that, because the need has spiked to such a degree, many college counseling centers have put really significant limitations on their mental health services. This varies from college to college and university to university. And honestly, some colleges are fantastic. Some, there are no limitations whatsoever. And if your child has a therapeutic relationship with an on-campus counselor, they can carry that reputation straight through their time when they graduate. For many others, if not the majority of others, however, they have had to put limitations on the amount of times that a kid can see a counselor. And so for some, it can look like 10 counseling sessions throughout a year. For some, we've heard it is as little as 4 or 5 counseling sessions throughout the entirety of their college career. For many of you, you may be thinking like 4 or 5 times sounds great. I don't even imagine my child will go once or twice to a college counselor. But if that's not the case, if you're already thinking, well, you know, my son, my daughter probably does need a little bit more support, the idea of 4 or 5 or 10 throughout the course of a year or 4 years, you already know is going to be significantly less than what they may need. And so if that is the case, obviously, you want to know what limitations are there. And if your child has decided to go to a place where there are significant limitations, maybe it's time to have a conversation about what other levels of support are appropriate or available within that area. So obviously there's privatized therapy. There's a lot of public institutions that can kind of supplant some of those services. But what we don't want is for a child to be in need, assuming that they're going to have this kind of safety net of support. They get there and then all of a sudden things go differently. And now you sort of have to figure this out with them, or they have to figure it out independently on top of all of the many other things that we know are challenging. In addition to that, if your child sees a counselor currently and intends to bring that therapist relationship with them to the next level, one of the issues that we have found since COVID and kind of the introduction of telehealth is the laws surrounding therapy have not quite caught up to where we would like them to be. And many counselors, even though they are able to perform their therapeutic duties via Zoom, they can only do it if the client is existing in the same state as where they are practicing. So in other words, if your therapist is in Massachusetts, you may not be able to have that same relationship the second that you step over into another state's lines. Each therapist, each kind of therapeutic entity kind of has their own relationship with this thing called reciprocity. There are some therapists that can perform across all 50 states. There are some that can perform internationally, but far more frequently, therapists are only getting their licensure or updating their licensure for the surrounding states, simply because it just kind of makes the most sense for them financially. So once again, if that is a relationship that you or your child would like to continue, it's probably time to start having that conversation now, because if that is not something that's going to be a viable option for them, you either want to, plan for that, or maybe start looking into other options that you can support now that will be able to carry them through. The last thing of note is I think it's probably worth, even if this isn't a relevant conversation for you right now, it's probably worth talking with your child about their relationship with mental health and how they can communicate with you should any issues arise. By the time that they are independent and on a college campus or doing whatever it is that they may do next year, they're going to be 18. And so what we know is that they have a ton more independence in regards to their information. And theoretically, they may want to, choose to, or just by I think not really knowing what to do, keep all this information internally and not know how to or where or why to share the information back home. So I think it's worth having the conversation now. Talk to your child about what that relationship looks like. Talk to them about information sharing and how you can be a supportive person to them whenever, if ever, they need something at the next level. And so with that being said, I think I'm going to kick it back over to Stephanie Worthley, who will answer some more questions and send us off for the day.
Okay, now that I've stopped sharing my screen, I can see everybody again. Thanks everybody for the information. Having not had a chance to look at the chat, maybe Anne, was there anything we needed to address as a large group, questions that came up?
I think there's just one that might be coming up right now, just a question on the application and what scale that we use for reporting grade point averages. So Medfield reports grade point averages on both a weighted and an unweighted scale using the 4.0 scale. So yes, it is possible to have higher than a 4.0 for students depending on the level of rigor in their curriculum and or if they've ever earned an A+. So that does impact things, but as students are answering that question on the Common Application, they will indicate that we do use the 4.0 scale. But that really, actually, there might be another question. Give me 1 second here. That appears to be all of the questions that have come through in the Q&A at this point.
Perfect. Well, I think one of the most important things that I hope parents take away from today is please reach out to your son or daughter's guidance counselor. We want to have conversations with you, your student. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page moving forward, so that way we can support the students' plans with what they're working on from our end. And again, we want to just make sure that all of our students have a plan for after graduation. So our goal really right now is to see our seniors fairly regularly over the next couple months. So again, reach out to us, let us know what questions you have, and we look forward to working with you and your student down the road. So thank you for joining us today. Again, I will share the recording of this presentation. So if you have friends that couldn't attend, I will share this out with everybody later today. So again, thank you. I hope you have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you soon.